My name is Goran Garevski, CTO and co-founder of HYCU. So as Simon actually opened the Pandora box of what is the current challenges in data protection, we'll try to solve it and see how we approach this kind of an era of thousands of data silos and how to simplify it and make efficient data protection for the customers, right? One of the biggest challenges when you want to conquer the world is that how to abstract, how to do it in an efficient way, right? 17,000 SaaS applications with a different type of data, different type of metadata, different type of configuration, different type of high availability and DR functionality built by the vendor itself, right? How to abstract it and to make it easy to use so that the customers actually have a zero learning curve. This was the goal of our cloud platform, right? What we learned actually in the past is, with our previous experiences, is that we wanted to avoid the trap of, how to say, of the first architecture definition, right? What happens is, I usually say, for every company, there's a DNA, right? So either they're coming from a storage background, from a monitoring background, right? From a development. And usually the first DNA is visible in their architecture and everything they do later, right? You can see very few cases in the whole industry back 30, 50 years that people redesign the whole thing and, how to say, fine-tune to the new environment, right? So the key for us were two goals, right? So first is how to abstract the problem across different types of sources, which is classical data center, file systems, containers, SaaS applications, database as a service, platform as a service, right? And action means that what is at least in our definition, nirvana in data protection, the same policy to be applied on a database as a service, on a SaaS service, or on a VM, or on a file server, right? That's abstraction we are looking for in order to address this problem, including 17,000 plus, how to say, applications. So the key here is the central intelligence for cross-cloud data protection management and the standard functionality. You would say this is the same slide with every vendor, but no one has abstraction on the policy level so that you apply it to different sources, right?
Assuming, Goran, that this is originally based on the secret sauce of HYCU, which of course is application awareness, which is way ahead of where most are. Do your policies also adapt based on the type of underlay? So like you said, we can have one abstraction, but there are policy elements that would be, wouldn't it need to exist for one data type versus another?
So for example, great question. We are abstracting all of the components of the policy. So from the original design, and Simon mentioned the penicillin moment, right? Is they're very simple in its core, as they should be, right? RPO, RTO goal, retention, copies, archives, right? And then potentially a fine-tuning on the policy itself. So if you look at the definition of the policy, you can pretty much apply it to anything, right? And in case it's not applicable, of course, user should be aware. But in a 99%, apply those simple properties of a policy to any type of source, right? And this is our approach from the very beginning, if you recall, right? In the application awareness for the VM hosted applications, right? File systems and so on. So that was the famous penicillin moment, right? And of course, we started with the infrastructure as a service with the classical things that we need to cover, right? Public clouds and the data center and VM hosted applications, right? But the key was here to add the future here, right? As Simon mentioned, tons of SaaS applications, different in nature, different in types of data, different in metadata, right? So for this, we actually extended our application or SaaS awareness model to cover also platform as a service, database as a service, and SaaS, right? But in order to address the 17,000 plus problem, which will become 20,000 or 50,000 in 5 years, right? You need an ecosystem. You cannot do it yourself. First are the original SaaS vendors, right, if they want to participate, or ISVs, or partners, channel partners that are specialized in a specific SaaS application. But the key, there must be a legal entity behind it, right, to join the development program. There's a defined process, right, how we work together, how we certify, how we check for vulnerabilities, security, and how we publish it later on the marketplace, right? So the key here is ability to extend the platform, to abstract the functionality, how you protect not just SaaS, DBaaS, PaaS, but potentially any workload, right? And to apply it in an efficient way, right? On top of it, right, we make known ourselves by auto-discovering things, right? Originally in the VM-hosted world, but now even more in much more complex world, which is the SaaS application and DBaaS applications, right? And again, we went step back, looked who are usually the key sources for these kind of things, and we will discuss the discovery process later in more details. But this is Okta and Azure AD, right? At the end of the day. And of course, as we go forward, we will try to bring in more additional sources, but currently looks, this is pretty much stable situation here in terms of to have an efficient discovery of the SaaS, DBaaS, and PaaS workloads, right? The key for us, and one of the key advantages, at least what we strongly believe against the competition, is that we do not, how to say, lock your data, right? So it's your storage, it's your data, right? We are providing a service that will protect your data, and we will store them on a storage that you define to us, that you have it, you own it at the end of the day, right? And this is applicable to the platform itself. On top of it, key to us is also the ability to automate, to orchestrate anything which is happening in the platform. This is the REST API, which is used also by our own user interface. So, how to say, this means that anything we do in the user interface can be done through the REST APIs too. And the key addition here is HYCU Marketplace, right? In order to properly address the problem, you can see HYCU has its own marketplace with all of the functionality required for a typical marketplace, which is tracking the consumption, publishing, updating, billing, if you want, either through us, either through different kind of a partner marketplaces on top of it. Let's dive deeper into a couple of key components of Dark Cloud platform and its extensibility. But first, when you look at 17,000 plus SaaS sources, what is the challenge? This is not the same problem as we had in the past, right? Where you can directly access the infrastructure, the storage, the hardware, and anything behind the application or service. We are talking about black box, right? So the DBaaS, the PaaS, and the SaaS stuff are pretty much a black box. So you cannot do much of a miracles. You have an API, right, with usually limited access to the data, right? On top of it, any SaaS company has its own, how to say, API throttling, or network throttling on top of it put, and limited bulk data APIs, right? When I say bulk data, means bulk data transfer, right? In order to perform efficient backup and recovery operation. Not to mention the granular recovery, which is the most key feature for the end users. The most wow effect we got from the end users on our cloud is with the discovery and with the granular recovery, right? Why? Because every application has a different types of objects, and this is a nightmare for a backup vendor, right? To protect and to recover. To mention more complex applications that have also their own plugins and custom ISVs that add metadata and other things on top of what is existing within the SaaS service. And of course, configuration recovery, because there are always data, metadata, but also a configuration of a service or a subcomponent of the service, right? So this is the challenges we faced when we approach the problem, right? And please.
Go back to the previous slide.
Yes.
So if we're talking about storing data, like let's say I'm in Azure, AWS, GCP, whatever, I'm still storing that data. So I'm still ultimately responsible for the storage or for storing that data. So where HYCU would come into play there is for the policy enforcement piece. If I'm holding onto the
data movement, data protection, recovery, everything on top of it, right? So we are providing a pure data protection as a service on top.
Okay, got it. And then one more question. Let's say from a multi-cloud perspective, right? Let's say I'm using Azure storage accounts and I'm using S3 and I have some data in S3 and I want to replicate that to Azure, for example. Is that capability available?
That's available through backup and recovery functionality.
Got it. Okay.
Right?
Thank you.
So we implement DR through the basic backup and recovery principles.
How do you avoid the problem of a customer doing something really dumb, like backing up their on-prem infrastructure to their on-prem infrastructure? Do you notice that?
Wait, is that really dumb?
Yeah. We call that enterprise.
I can say the customers are very creative, right? So we proactively monitor behind the SaaS service, but also through our telemetry here, right? In terms of what is happening and try to guideline them. We have a daily, Shrisha's team has a continuous success. We are very fanatic about customer success, right? So we always, there's a proactive service that we monitor, but also daily continuous synchronization between the customer success team and the customer. So can we catch everything? No, right? But I think the NPS score tells itself, right? So.
Yeah, one of the things I'd love to see, and we'll see. I don't want to be like the guy that's going to preview what the demo should be, but as we look at the policy, RPO, RTO, like general high-level policies, super cool. We need that as an application layer. This application is protected in this way via this policy, presuming you have a proprietary.
We will have a demo
or whatever, but also how deep into the elements and the artifacts of that, because Salesforce data versus O365 data versus a record level stuff is.
We will address the theoretical part in the following slides, and then you will see a demo for a couple of SaaS services, right?
Oh, and also one quick one. Right, yeah. So luckily I've spent a lot of time in Justia for the last week finding what you guys are doing. You got an incredible patent attorney. He writes a lot. I've studied way too much. One thing about air-gapped environments, I know you have federal customers, presumably you've got some situations where you may have to deal with air gaps.
Yes.
We need to.
So we support them.
Yeah.
But one last one. Yeah. So all of these different data types, services, have very different data profiles. So you're building hundreds, thousands of custom data moves.
Yes.
That's a hell of a challenge. Just having data movers.
The biggest challenge here is how to abstract the platform so that multiple, partners can write efficient modules that will support different systems.
Yes. If I understand correctly, you're not building the data movers. You have an API to which they.
We will go in the following slides if you don't mind, right? So let's go first on the discovery process, because this is one of the wow effects. And Simon was talking about rGraph, the value there. But, let me just explain a couple of key challenges there, right? So it's not so easy to discover a SaaS source or DBaaS source, right? Why? Because there's no central registry of all of the SaaS sources. Usually the CIOs don't even know about 20-30% of the SaaS services within the company, right? So, but the most close approximation or hint about the SaaS services are the IDP vendors, right? So like Okta, like Azure AD, right? So what we do there is, Simon mentioned, we interface and collect data about how these services are configured. But that's far from enough, right? What we did also, we have a pre-built intelligence and information about the SaaS application and their built-in SaaS protection. So it's very important to understand what are the HA or operational backup capabilities behind the service itself, because data protection is multi-layered approach, right? You have operational stuff behind the SaaS service, then you have a more, compliance stuff and so on, right? So the key is to inform the people, because this information is not available, on the table instantly, right? Sometimes you dig into different sources. Key for us is to give it to the user so that they understand what is the protection behind the SaaS service without any backup vendor approaching, right, the service itself. Then what we do is advanced logic, how to identify, because there's a massive gap between the data which is provided by the IDP vendors and the actual SaaS instance that you need to protect, right? Or what the user has, right? So there's a advanced identification, filtering, and auto-mapping logic to remove the noise, because there are a lot of, also irrelevant SaaS stuff within the IDP vendor kind of a catalog, right? And at the end, as you filter that, we are very proud also of our classification. So we help you to identify by grouping specific SaaS services into industry categories, right? For example, if you have a Jira, it will be mapped into the engineering kind of a subsection of the R graph, right? Or sub-tree, right? If you have a HR, you will have Bamboo HR part of the sub-tree there, right? So we're just trying to group and automate that discovery process so the CIO, CISO, IT manager, whoever is there, right, is able to see and who have the quality information to understand what is happening in the environment. And of course, ideally, because this is not, our graph is not just for services, to be clear. So we add here the classical workloads, VMs, right, database as a service. So this is a visualization and of the whole data environment here. And to propagate and provide a status of the whole environment about data protection and the compliance, right? So this is ideally the single picture you need to see to understand if you're safe or not, right?
You talk about you've obviously got a RESTful API.
Yes.
You provide also access to the graph for folks to be able to.
Yes.
I see more and more people are beginning to understand graph has different ways in which you can represent that data.
A lot of people also want to add value on the graph, right? Potentially you can have additional information. So a lot of interesting stuff in front of us, right? What I wanted to give you a clue also is what part of the typical backup application is done by the platform and what part is done by the module itself. So our goal was to minimize the effort the partner, potentially in the future customer, if they do their own kind of modules, need to do in order to have an efficient data protection solution for a specific source, right? SaaS source. So if you can see, we managed to minimize the effort put into the module to a bare bone effort. Anything the development partner need to do is really tied to the SaaS application itself. No additional layers, no kind of architectural services. Beauty of the abstraction, right? As I mentioned, the policy management, the storage management, managing the life cycle of the backup copies, retention, all of those kind of, tough and ugly things, right, are done by the platform, and the module itself focuses purely on the interaction with the SaaS service.
I do have a question for you here. You're doing a very good job managing literally all the data and all these different platforms. What if I wanted to use this to migrate from service X to service Y? I could see something like Dropbox to OneDrive would be straightforward, but what if you wanted to do, say, Microsoft Dynamics CRM to Salesforce? Is that possible?
We can talk for the next 5 days on that topic, right? So what I want to say, the key for us was first to protect, right? Each platform has its own format of the data, if you want, right? So, and it's extremely tough to migrate between one SaaS service and another because there are a lot of things around, right? But, for us, the first goal was to provide a protection, right? And to give you the data, right? So in the future, everything is possible, but first we need to protect the data and give you control of the data itself, right?
Hey, thank you. Hey, that was a great question, David. Thank you. One of the things that we've been hearing from CIOs a lot this year in light of the macroeconomic environment is the word negotiability, which I wasn't sure is a real word, but I've heard it from 3 different CIOs. And what they're all saying is it's really, really becoming a problem because all of their budgets are cut, and then they have the same SaaS vendors they've got to negotiate with. Well, the hardest thing about negotiating with a SaaS vendor is they've got all your data. So the idea that they actually have a white slate, a canvas where they can put all of that data so that it can then be migrated somewhere else increases their negotiation position. No, try saying that 3 times fast. Their negotiating position, simply by virtue of the fact that that data is now in their control. And we're seeing that as a big value add for a lot of customers.
I don't want to be the guy that goes against the challenge. David brings a great question. Everybody asks the question, just like people say, hey, do you support Google Cloud? And they say, oh, do you run Google Cloud? Like, no. I just want to know if you do support it. I think a lot of these questions, like especially data portability between systems, we intellectually like to think that we could do it. But then in practicality, do you actually see people moving data between these systems? Or is it really more, in your view, or anecdotal experience, that we just move data in and out of that same platform, but we need the policy level? Like,
I think there are, SaaS is such a wide place. It's such a big ocean that we're swimming in. So let's take Jira, for example. It's not necessarily that people are moving off of Jira, but there is a massive move from Jira on-prem to Jira in cloud. And so when you look at things like that, I think that's where we're seeing that shift. And I think that's where HYCU can really help support. It is on a use case, basis for sure. And I like the way that you approach that, because you're right. There are some things that people want to see as and there's no one red button you can hit to move everything from here to here. But I think in areas where we are, really doubling down, like Atlassian, certainly there's a tremendous amount of value add we can provide in that process.
I think to summarize some of the questions that I have that are kind of related to these is, like all data protection presentations, you're talking a lot about backup, but my snarky statement is no one needs backups. We only need recovery, right? And therefore, I want to hear more about recovery or migration or all the words that go around that. Like backing up data, good. My emotional security is through the roof. I'm happy. But recovery is why I sleep at night.
I absolutely love that. And I'm glad that that's on tape somewhere because I may try to use it.
Go ahead.
So one of their patents, and again, I do brag about patents probably too much.
I just looked up your first one.
It's in UI recovery. Yeah. Now, I think this is one of the most critical aspects of our cloud. It is one thing, as you rightly say, to be able to back up data and then recover it to a CSV file. It's completely nonsense. It's useless. What you really want to do is be able to recover your data in a simple format that looks and feels like the platform you're using. You want it to feel as close to an in-app recovery experience as possible. And that's what we've done. Okay. And it's customizable so that the verbiage is associated to each individual SaaS app. So if the SaaS app uses events as a category, you're going to see events when you recover, right? And I think that's the kind of customization that our cloud provides that is really, really game changing.
Yeah, so show us the recovery. That's what I'm saying.
Yes. So we definitely have a demos after this, but just to add on top of Simon's comments, so each module has our cloud has a mechanism, so each module self-describes the types of data, what can be recovered, right? And where can be recovered. So which means it's not burnt into the platform, but it's a logic brought by the module itself, by the integration, which means if the module supports 100 types of recovery use cases, the platform will show them, right? And that's the beauty of the extensibility. So we can go in details as well as in wide, right?
How do I stop a vendor from locking me in? So if the vendors are making the modules and they define where it can be backed up and what can be backed up and recovered, if I'm in AKS, for example, I want to move my application to GKE. I don't want the AKS module to say I can't restore to GKE.
I understand. So the container services are actually managed by HYCU. So this is and we provide a cross-cloud support, right? We are talking here about the SaaS application in the nature. So the computing platforms, the container services, file systems, the core kind of infrastructure as a service, it's covered by HYCU, and we provide multi-cloud kind of operations there.
So like, for example, like Microsoft isn't creating the integration for AKS, HYCU is creating the integration for AKS.
Yes.
And then anything SaaS related.
Anything SaaS, potentially DBaaS, which is also very specific, right? It's done by the external partners.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah,
sense.
but
But
as long as as long as the coding of the application is up to the vendor, the SaaS vendor, they're not going to build a workflow to restore it to their competitor. It's just not going to happen. You say you have the data, you have control over the API, but
the module defines what can be restored and where can be restored. If the module is done by the independent software vendor, they can define their own use cases. If the module is done by the original SaaS vendor, they define their use cases, right?
So you mentioned a vetting process for when they submit this module integration. Is any of that vetting process covering the restore points or how they're storing the data to make sure that customers have full access?
Within our process, we review if this is a product that addresses the quality level and the restore use cases for a typical application there, right? So there must be minimal functionality there, not just backup, for example, without restore, right? Okay. So we have a review process where we review the use cases. There must be core value, minimal value, and then we go from there. Right?
Are you trying to sell more to software as a service vendors or end customers?
I think there are 17,000 applications to be covered. Anyone is welcome, right? So,
what is your target? Like, that's what
we are working with them.
Asking.
Yeah.
It's end customers.
Yes.
Okay.
It's absolutely end customers. So the SaaS vendors are simply a means to expedite the source by source integration and development process. Our customer base are the end customers of those SaaS vendors.
Yeah.
Is any of this open source or is the code available in a sense of, let's say you're using one vendor and you want to restore to another vendor, but the integration that vendor A created doesn't have that process. Can I go in and write the code to do that? Or is this all closed?
In order to write module, you need to be part of our development partner program, right? And to go all of the checks, right? But you can dump the data in terms if you want, right?
Yeah. So like I can, create some type of pull request on the module, rewrite it the way that I want to, bring it in-house. That would work.
You can use the REST API to customize additional workflows on top.